the majority of our life is lived in liminal space.
And there's this in-between space, this liminal space.
This liminality that reveals possibility.
I think we're in a liminal moment, but also in a place of transformation.
I have great affection for the church and a troubled relationship with it.
Just to be alive in time means that we're on the threshold of the future.
That can't be the gospel, because God said to love our neighbors.
We don't know what the future looks like. We have to work it out together.
Josh Patterson, welcome back to the Liminal Living Podcast. It's great to have you on again.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me back. It's been a minute.
It's been, we had to look it up because it's been a little while, and it was March of 2024, so that makes it about a year and a half.
But we have stayed in touch.
That's what I was going to say.
Text fairly often.
Yeah.
Or talk on the phone.
Because we're like podcast bros now.
Yeah, right. Exactly.
Because you run Rethinking Faith, I run Liminal Living. I don't know. Last time, we talked, I was like, I don't always do what I did afterwards. I hit stop recording. I'm like, we need to exchange phone numbers because you're cool.
Right on. Yeah.
So
it's been fun, dude.
Yeah. Now we get to text back and forth in between podcast episodes.
Mm-hmm. And be like, here's why this thing is annoying, or here why this thing is super cool.
And I texted you, I think it was a couple weeks ago, and I'm like, hey, I'm just about to interview Brian McLaren. And then you're like, I'm going to interview him next week. And then we just started talking, and I was like, I got to have you back on the show.
Yeah. And here we are.
Yeah,
I put out my interview with Brian. Well, as of today, it was last week. On my feed, which was fun.
Yeah, he's such a generous person.
But yeah, he's super cool, and I got to spend some time with him in the at the Grand Targhee Resort at OrtCon this year. Tom Ort invited me to come and do some live podcasting and some nighttime entertainment stuff for the conference, and Brian was one of the speakers. And so went on a few walks together, ate meals together a couple times, and had really good conversations, and just a super nice guy. When I went to interview him and he got on, instead of just wanting to jump right in, he remembered things we had talked about and was asking me updates on things and how I was doing. So very kind individual. Shout out to Brian McLaren.
He's a real deal, man.
Yeah.
So funny Brian McLaren story.
Okay.
His publisher reached out to me and said, hey, do you want to have Brian McLaren on? And they did this whole email promoting him. I'm like, dude, it's Brian McLaren. You don't got to promote him. Like, yes. I didn't say that. That's unprofessional. But anyways, we scheduled it in on Mac. You can click on the date and then create an event from it. So I clicked on the date and created an event for interviewing Brian McLaren. But I clicked on the wrong date. I clicked on the book release date, not the agreed upon interview time. So it created a date 3 weeks in the future from when I was. And so I was in the middle of cleaning out my barn for a whole grad party thing. And I was just covered in barn dust. It was dirty in there. We got a dumpster throwing stuff in, sweaty. I'm about to hop in the shower to get it all out. And I set my phone down. And I realized I got a text from someone I don't know. And I look at it and it's like, hey, this is Brian McLaren. I'm in the Riverside room. No one's here. I'm wondering what's going on. I was like, here I am about to get in the shower and I'm texting Brian McLaren. I'm like, I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened. I had to figure it out, but I had to shower first. And he was so gracious. He's like, hey, I really want to have this conversation. So let's reschedule that. And we did.
Nice.
I got it in there, but not many people have stood up Brian McLaren. I was just like, I can't believe I did that. That never happens.
Yeah, it's all good.
Yeah,
shit happens. Basically,
he was so kind about it too. I was like, just so gracious about it.
That sounds like it.
Yeah, he was. Well, what have you been curious about? You've been having a lot of podcast episodes. You release them. What have you been studying, exploring, and thinking about as of late?
Yeah, I've been doing a lot of radical theology stuff recently, which has been a newish fun place of exploration for me. And then also bringing that into conversation with my first love, which
process.
Process theology. Yeah, exactly.
Yep.
So, which is a lot of fun. So, like, listen, if listeners don't know, process theology is a philosophically constructive project, and radical theology is philosophically deconstructive. So they're seemingly at odds,
Yin and
and
yang.
yeah, and so also you have like your process people who, most of them, I'm speaking in generalities here, most of them posit that God exists, that there's an ontological being or a ground of being called God. Most radical theologians can be mistaken as atheists because they're not going to do all the metaphysical stuff. It's not quite the same as atheism because they're being cheeky and doing something a little bit different. But yeah, it's a lot of fun and it's been very helpful. I've really enjoyed it, actually, enough that I've been working on an edited volume, and kind of it'll be a little bit more geared towards academics, not necessarily PhDs, but also probably not your average, layman in the pew, bringing radical and process theologians together. Because I think even though they're so different, there's tons and tons and tons of overlap. And yeah, it's kind of reviving an old conversation. So back in the day, John Cobb, who's kind of like the dude in process thought, and then Altizer, who kind of made what's called Christian atheism popular. Those two were like buddies, and they did this like process radical conversation before I was born, and exchanged essays back and forth and talked about it all the time. And so it's been fun to kind of revive that conversation. And actually, we're going to be publishing some unpublished writings from Cobb and Altizer to kind of like commemorate them. Altizer's passed away a while ago, but John Cobb died recently, within the last year or so. And so it'll be a fun way to kind of commemorate everything that they've done. And then also, as Tripp told me, he said, Josh, really? He was like, you figured out a way to have all the smartest people answer your personal biggest existential question. And I was like, shut up, you're not wrong. But yes, that's what I'm doing. I'm weaseling my way in. So that's some things
cool.
I've been thinking about, working on.
That's the cool part about having a podcast is like it's ongoing education. It's like I got more questions. Academically, I have quote unquote arrived. I have a doctorate degree, but I always felt like that was like 10 years ago. I'm a totally different person now. I go back and read my dissertation. I'm like, gosh, I would change so much here now because it's 2015, I think, is when it was accepted. So yeah, 10 years ago.
Nice.
And the world is like radically changing, evolving, and so am I. I've gone through a whole lot of deconstruction, reconstruction since then. And it's just like, this has been a way for me to keep learning, keep having conversations, and talk to some people that, I've respected over the years, voices that have formed me. And then I get to have like actual conversations with some really cool people and learn stuff. Yeah, it's like, it's a way to keep learning and have those conversations. So it's like education that everyone else gets to listen in on. It's like, let's listen to what Tom learns today.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's very much how the podcast, functions for myself. It's, basically, if you go back and listen, actually, I want to give a shout out. There's a person, I'm not going to use their last name, but their name is also Brian. It's not Brian McLaren, who I met about a year ago at Theology Beer Camp. And they told me like, hey, this is who I am. I was told by a mutual friend that I should listen to your podcast. I haven't done that yet, but I'm going to start from the beginning and listen through the whole thing. And I was like, please don't do that. Some of the early stuff is so bad and so cringy. But he was like, yeah, okay, I understand. However, I like seeing the way people progress and grow. And so I got a message about a week ago from this person telling me like, I am officially all caught up. And so they listened to my whole freaking podcast.
That's a lot of Josh Patterson.
Yeah, back from 2017 till now. And I don't know, and he did could see kind of the narrative arc, and that's really what Rethinking Faith has been, honestly, is like a public education of myself, talking to cool people I want to talk to, and shifting and changing and growing and giving TMI on the internet.
Yeah. Yeah. Learning in public, being wrong in public, changing your mind in public. Like, I think
Yep.
all of those, that was my fear of starting a podcast, was like, oh crap, I'm going to be wrong, or I'm going to say things that are going to change. And it's like, I just had to get over that and say, I don't care. Like, I got to throw something out there. And
Yeah.
my friend Matt Tebby was like, I had to be committed to, growing and evolving in a public space if I was going to say anything at all. And I was like, oh yeah, I think I need to be okay with that too. And so I've just given myself permission to change and to disagree with my earlier self, but allow it to stay there.
Yeah. No, absolutely. I think that's also like my biggest fear about writing. And it's kind of tied to like how you're talking about your dissertation. It's like, what if I write something and then 2 years from now I'm like, oh, Josh, you freaking idiot. Why did you do that? Why'd you think that? Why'd you say that? But I think that's really just a part of it. And like so many of my friends who do write have told me that that's just like something you have to get over. And like, don't think of what you're writing as like your final word on something, but just this is a checkpoint of where I'm at now. I'm trying to forward this conversation that's going on more broadly. And, hopefully 5 years from now, I do see things that I would have done differently, because that means I've continued to grow and learn and change and not be static, which, as a process person, I don't think anything is static. So
that's true.
I probably
Process
shouldn't try to be
theology is
static myself. Yeah.
Things are in process. They're evolving and changing and growing, even God. So,
Even God, moment by moment.
yeah. You spend a whole lot of time on your podcast talking about deconstruction. And I think like we're in the same space. Like we've talked about that quite a bit. We kind of get it. We get the ingredients, why we deconstructed, what we deconstructed. I've been able to identify, like white supremacy is in there, and patriarchy is in there, and colonialism is in there. And, it's like, all right, I've talked to enough people that have deconstructed that I think I know why we had to do it and all the ingredients that we pulled out of it. We talked about that. And now I'm kind of curious about how do we not necessarily reconstruct, but almost like re-enchant the world? Because when you deconstruct, sometimes you get a little bit like, I guess, gun shy about like, was that God? Am I hearing God? Is this okay? Is that the thing that I deconstructed? And then all of a sudden you're left with this like cynical, flattened, blah, materialist world where there is no like magic. There's no sacredness. It's all just like, well, that's what I used to believe, and now there's nothing. And so I think there has to be like some kind of a, not necessarily a rebuilding or reconstruction, but a re-enchantment of the world without going backwards into superstitions and different things. What do you think of around that concept? Is that something that you've been able to think about at all?
Yeah, I mean, most definitely. That's part of why I have found process thought so helpful in my own experience, is because, I mean, there's literally like a key process text called Re-Enchantment without supernaturalism.
I found that work. I actually got it. I finally got it.
Oh, wonderful. It is a fantastic book by David Ray Griffin. And actually, I think you did a conversation with my buddy Chad, right? Chad Ball.
Yes, and
did you
his
talk
dissertation.
about you talked about his dissertation, right? So he pulls heavily from David Ray Griffin. That's like kind of the leading voice in what he's doing. That, and I mean, he's using it to update Schleiermacher essentially. But yeah, because it doesn't live like process thought is able to recognize that this kind of like conservative evangelical space that I came out of, that understanding and atheism are not the only two options.
Yeah.
That, it's not religion or science or faith or science, something like that. But process thought actually works very nicely with the sciences, and also recognizes the importance of transcendence and spirituality and the kind of like collective effervescence that comes from participating in something larger than yourself. So that's one of the biggest, draws or sticking points for me, specifically with process thought, is that it offers a genuine way to re-enchant the world without having to check my brain at the door. It's difficult. Like, process thinking is not easy. Some major fundamental shifts that people have to make in thinking, the metaphysics, like how the world works, basically, in process thought is radically different from the metaphysics that most people assume. And even if someone thinks like, oh, I don't have a metaphysics, I don't know what you're talking about, you have a metaphysics, you just don't know it.
Yeah.
We all have one. And it's shifting, from, like, most of our metaphysical assumptions today are substance-based, a substance-based ontology. So, like, if you have jumped over to the, like, atheist side of things and are rejecting anything kind of supernatural, you're now just a strict reductionistic materialist. That's your metaphysics, is that the world is just made up of matter. That's it. And you and I are just chemical processes and atoms bumping into each other. That's a metaphysic. Or, like, for me growing up as an evangelical, we still had a substance-based ontology, but it was soul or spirit and matter, two separate things, right? That kind of are at play. That's a metaphysic. For process thinking, process is an event-based ontology. So it doesn't think in terms of substances, which is a huge shift, especially when process people start talking about God, because if you're thinking in a substance-based mode of thought, when a process person is speaking, assuming their event-based metaphysic, you're not going to understand what they're saying. It's not going to make any sense. So forgive me, that was a bunch of just like technical jargon, but the answer to your question is yes, and process thought has been the answer for me. And radical theology to an extent, but that could get messy if I try to throw radical thought out there real quick. I'm happy to do so, but process has been huge for me.
Like that substance to event thinking is kind of like we learn first in the Western world, we learn our nouns first. That's a cow, that's a dog, that's your mom, that's your, like we learn all those. And I've heard, I can't remember what book it was, I think it maybe have been Freakonomics way back in the day, that Eastern thinkers, like, they learn their verbs first. And like that is just two different ways of thinking in the world. Like, nouns are the thing or verbs are the things. And so would you think that process theology would be closer to more of those Eastern thoughts, Eastern religions that like Western people just have no clue about and have no idea to understand them?
Yes, I think the process God is much more a verb than a noun. An ongoing, unfolding, creative force in the world that is shifting and growing moment by moment. And each, that means nothing is static. Everything is constantly in flux, constantly in process. You, me, the tree, my desk, God. And so, it's this constant unfolding. And so what's happening is in each moment, it's Whitehead. So Alfred North Whitehead is the philosopher who came up with what he called a philosophy of organism, which then that's called now process philosophy, although he never called it that. It's always philosophy of organism for him. And what he was trying to do is make sense of like quantum physics and these kind of things, because our ways of understanding the world don't work with what, we're learning and continue to learn or think we know about quantum physics. No one really seems to understand what's going on there. So forgive me, I lost my train of thought, but the gist of it is, drops of experience, moment by moment. And so what's happening in the world with the divine is that God in each moment is experiencing all of creation fully, then God takes those experience moment by moment into God's self, evaluates them, and then offers in the next moment the best possible thing. So it always towards goodness, beauty, and truth. So it's teleological. It has a goal in mind. Not necessarily an end goal like traditional Christian theology where you have like, here's the guaranteed eschatological outcome where the heavens and earth come back together and blah, 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 blah. But it's still purposeful. It's still searching out the good, the beautiful, and true, novelty, creativity, these kind of things. And so that's happening constantly. So that's God is very much a verb, more so than a noun.
Yeah.
Does that make sense?
A little bit. My brain kind of exploded a little bit because one of the things I've been noticing about my theology is it's very earth-based. Like, if you look at like the second coming of Christ, like God is supposed to return to earth and set up the, eternal reign of God. That is very medieval in understanding because it would be like a king and it would be a land and the earth is about as big as it is. And now, our cosmology has exploded. I mean, if you look at, you just go ahead and Google like how big is the universe and the images, like it's humongous. Like, and that's new understanding. Like we didn't even know there was another galaxy until 100 years ago, 1925, when Hubble measured the distance through the Andromeda Nebula and found out, well, that's on the outside of our Milky Way. So it's a different galaxy. That's brand new information in the last century. And everything else, all of the theologies that are so earth-based, when you say that God takes all of creation, all of the experiences all at once and then offers the next possibility, then I'm thinking like, well, like a different galaxy and across the universe, yes, there's an experience of something over there that God takes into effect and then offers. So it just makes it far bigger than my little tiny brain can encapsulate. Like that's a big verb. Like the entire cosmos, like God experiences it and then offers little old me, the next possibility. How it seems too big to comprehend, like too big to even bring that down to the ground. But then the temptation is to then reject it and go back to an earth-based theology that's all right here in this little tiny dust speck of a world in the grand scheme of things, which is then not big enough. So how do you not get lost in that thought?
I think we need both. It needs to be a both end because it is massive. And like that was a huge shift in my own theology, was just recognizing how anthropocentric, how people-centered my thinking was, which makes sense because we are people. So of course that's how we're going to do our theology. But there's other stuff out there. Like when I learned that creation's not done, to use Christian language, like the universe is literally still expanding and God has to be at least as big as the universe. So to me, it makes sense that God too is still growing and expanding as well. And kind of is the primary driving force behind all of that. But I think we still need both. I don't think, if I just live in cosmic la land, it's helpful because it can bring balance to some of my overly anthropocentric thoughts. Also, it helps inspire something like awe, which is really important. I think a lot of times when we go through deconstruction, we lose awe and wonder because we think that that's somehow like magical thinking or whatever. But I mean, even there's a guy named, Dacher Keltner, I believe, wrote a book called Awe, The New Science of Everyday Wonder and How It Can Transform Your Life. And that's a scientist recognizing like awe is important.
Yeah.
So like we need that. But also I think in a practical standpoint here on Earth, we can still recognize that, the implications for us in the here and now, that we do live on Earth, and that within the process perspective, as you can see, everything is deeply interrelated and interconnected. Like we don't exist as individuals. I can't tell the Josh Patterson story without also telling Tom's story because you are have now been included in me. Like, I don't know who I am without you telling me who I am, and vice versa. Like, we're interconnected now. And so I think to ground that is just to recognize that genuine interconnectedness, not just with your neighbor, but with animals, with the planet, with the earth. We're all kind of tied up in this together. And so Process does a good job of balancing the transcendent and the immanent. This will get kind of confusing, so forgive me, but literally where there's two different aspects of the divine in Process thought. You have the primordial nature of God, which is the transcendent, and the consequent nature of God, which is the immanent. And so we can focus on both of those and use them to balance each other out. So big picture, here and now.
And the here and now, which
Yeah.
the here and now is like our only perspective that we can have. So it has to be important, and there's the sacrament of the present moment, which is the holiness of the now moment that's here. But then the awe of the transcendent, that the verb that's too big to actually wrap my mind around. I think that brings like a humility to Christianity that has been prideful, because we got to say who's in and out. We got to say who God approves of and who doesn't, who's in charge. Like, we have been in charge since 300 and some AD, when Rome was just like, we're taking over and co-opting this thing. So there was like this natural, we are the ones who then get to determine all these things. But now there's like this great humbling that's happening for religion. And it looks like you look at it, it looks like religion is on the decline, but I think religion is just actually putting its feet back on the ground,
Mm-hmm.
So less people will identify as Christian or churchgoer or whatnot. I don't see that as a threat to the faith at all. I see that more as it's grounding us again. We have to learn how to talk from a place of not being the ones in charge. And we don't know how to do that yet.
Mm-hmm.
So that's one of the things that I've been trying to learn. I do a lot of funerals, like 30 a year.
Yeah, that's a
And
lot.
it is a lot. And I did one just this past week. And they wanted he wasn't a spiritual person or a religious person. So just keep it, centered around his life. So I centered it around his life. We talked a little bit about grief and how it works and my experiences with it. And someone came up to me afterwards, and they were a very churchy person. And usually when a churchy person hears my non-spiritual funerals, I get critiqued. They're just like, oh, you're just like a humanist, whatever. And then I just write them off and say, whatever. But this person, very churchy, instead said, today you spoke the words of God, but it was very human. And I've not heard that before. And I was like, oh, I think that's the best compliment I could have got.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Because I talked about grief. I didn't throw Bible verses at him. I didn't get preachy. I didn't talk about the afterlife or salvation or redemption. I just talked about grief, and this is what it looks like, and here's how we experience it. And they're like, that was very human. And I've never heard that before. They were an older person, been in church their whole life. It's like, I think we need to learn that. Like, how do we make our faith human again and not this ultra uber spiritual otherworldly thing? And not a conspiracy theory of, well, here's what's really going on. Jesus is really in charge and he's coming back. He'll take us all away. And, you look at how Christianity I used to believe it. And it's like, it was just a big conspiracy theory that we labeled as, Christianity, and it was against the world, against the physical world operates, how humans think and operate, how science declares, how the world works. It was just a big conspiracy theory. And it's like, you reject that, you get human again with the faith in very practical ways. And I think that's been a first step for me of like re-enchanting the world, trying to make it sacred again, is by just occupying the humanness that we are supposed to occupy, and trying to use faith and all that the vocabulary to then describe the human experience of it instead of the otherworldliness of it. And I think that's what I'm learning right now. I'm in process. So.
Yeah, aren't we all? Yeah, I love that, dude. I think so like I have many thoughts. I wrote down some notes when you were talking. But like one thing I'd want to say up front is like, yeah, we're constantly always in process, and that's true not just of Christian moments of becoming, but for everyone's becoming, Muslim, atheist, Jew, whatever. Those things about the divine and how the divine interacts with the world is true for everybody. And so I think it makes sense that if we are seeing kind of this decline in, I don't know, religion, or maybe like church attendance, religious observation, something like that, but people are still very spiritual or looking for some kind of transcendence, which I think, we see happen all the time. The kind of stereotypical example is, right, like think about all the people who left evangelical Christianity and now they like sit outside with their like stones that they bought at the New Age shop and like charge it on the moon or whatever. That's like, I'm not making fun of that. That's just another way of seeking out transcendence. People want that. And so I think this is why I get so frustrated when people, I like your conspiracy theory language, but people, what we've been taught a lot of the times is that Christianity is just reducible to a set of mental propositions, things that you have to accept and believe as true, regardless if there's evidence or not, and that's what makes somebody a Christian. I think that's just bogus, and it does a disservice to the Christian tradition as a whole. And how I would prefer to talk about it is approaching Christianity as a wisdom tradition, because it's about living into something, not necessarily believing the correct things. And so the easiest, the way that I like to put it most often is that, is to talk about faith. Like, what does it mean to have faith? And Aaron Simmons, philosopher friend of mine, he's a phenomenologist, likes to talk about faith as risk in a direction. So that's his idea. Faith is risking oneself in a direction. And then there was he's now dead, but a German theologian named Paul Tillich.
Yeah,
and
totally.
Tillich, he did like a bunch of theology of culture and all this kind of stuff, and was great. I mean, he kind of came up when like the Nazis were a thing, and he was like, if Christianity gives us Nazis, I don't want that. I'm going to do something different. So he did. Tillich describes faith, says everybody has faith, no matter what. And faith is your matter of ultimate concern. And so what I like to do is I borrow from Tillich and I borrow from Aaron, and I say, okay, what is my matter of ultimate concern? It's love. And then, you can add on from Aaron. He also asked this question, like in a very Kierkegaardian sense, like, what is worthy of your finitude? Like when we think about and contemplate the fact that we're going to die someday, what is worth our finitude? And for me, I can equate that with my matter of ultimate concern. So love, again, love is worthy of my finitude. And so for me to have faith is to risk myself in the direction of love in all that I do. And that's a way of being in the world. That's a very embodied, earthy, re-enchanted way of doing things that is not predicated on here's 10 ideas that you have to believe to be true, but it's a disposition. Yeah, does that make sense?
Yeah,
That's kind of like how I've been thinking about it more recently.
it's kind of like jazz. Like,
Yeah.
if you study the history of jazz or blues, I think it was blues. Well, blues came out of like the Southern slavery. Black people were trying to put music on their experience, and they developed some of the, most amazing musicians in a form of music. And then like the academy learned like, whoa, that's really good. Let's dissect it and turn it into music theory. And really like, then we own it. because now we know the different parts of it and can teach it to other people. And they knew more about jazz than the people who invented it, if you look at it from an academic creedal standpoint, because they could identify, all the different things that went into it, and, the thirds and the fifths, and they did a whole music theory around it. And then all of a sudden it's like, no, we know jazz because, we teach classes on jazz, and we own the theory around it. We came up with the concept. But like, there's something about somebody who knows just, the metronome and can keep the metronome and hit the right notes at the same time as the metronome is clicking, as is somebody who's playing from the depth of their experience of suffering in the South. And you listen to some of the early recordings of blues artists, and it's like, there's just something there that can't be replicated in the academy, no matter how much theory you learn about it. And I think theory can be helpful as a musician. It's like, it helps me to understand things, but it doesn't replace the actual embodiment of the music. If you don't embody the music, then it just seems overproduced or dead, or, it's like, you listen to Bob Dylan, you're like, that was good, and then you listen to some overproduced pop album from today, you're like, well, it's catchy, it's probably going to be popular, but it's not Dylan, it's like, so I think there's that piece into it. Like, we've taken this very human experience of the world and sacred things, then we put all of this like vocabulary around it, and then all of a sudden we own it, and then we are the authors of it, and then we dispense it, and then we say who's right and wrong and in and out. We hand out the grades, like we're professors. And then you can look at indigenous people's faith and how they express themselves in the world, very connected to the land. It's like, wow, they really got some things about humanity and how to live in harmony with the land that you're on without totally like stripping it of resources and turning everything into a capitalistic game or something. And it's just, I think that is a form of that colonial mindset, is you have to define, own, and distribute it as the owners of it. And Christianity has been doing that. And so then you have stupid questions like, well, which religion is right? It's like, that's the wrong question. It's like, which one is the owner of all ultimate truth and reality and can dispense it? And it's like, well, none of them, it's like, it's a human experience of the world here. And then how you put vocabulary around it, it's not necessarily about that. It's about living in this moment. How are you living? So I really like your definition of faith, and like that ultimate concern of being loved. Like, that just really, it puts it as a verb instead of a bunch of nouns that you have to agree to, It's like, I'm going to do something with this. I don't care if all those nouns are correct. I'm going to do this. I'm going to live this way. And it just seems like it's more real. And that, to me, I think is sacred. More sacred than labeling something as sacred because it's in a certain building, in a certain room, on a certain table.
Mm-hmm.
I think.
Yeah, and it's a very existential disposition or way of like having, doing, being faith. But I think it's helpful because so another thing that's super helpful to me, that I'm stealing from Tripp Fuller, and I think Tripp got it from Phil Clayton, because Phil was his doctoral advisor. But one thing about theology that trips a lot of people up is that confessional language, there's basically different registers of theological thought and idea speaking, and confessional language conflates them together. So we have these different registers. Like, you have the metaphysical register, where you can ask metaphysical questions. How does the world work? Then you have the historic register, which is like, okay, what happened in history? And then you have, so think of like Jesus seminar people doing like historic Jesus work. And then you also have the existential register, which is kind of the, what do we do with it, right? what's worthy of my finitude kind of stuff. And confessional language conflates all of them together and doesn't know how to differentiate between the registers. And so then, like, say you have like shitty metaphysics, and because of that, you know, when you start talking about, I don't know, something that still makes me uncomfortable, like resurrection, you have bad metaphysics, and so you can't consider a better alternative, but you're still like, it's caught up in these like this like conflation of registers. And so maybe a helpful way to demonstrate this is I was asked to preach recently at an Episcopal church that my friend Father Derek is the or was formerly. He actually just got reappointed. If that's how Episcopals say it, I don't know.
Don't know.
But
he
moved to a church like a mile up the street. Asked me to preach on the Doubting Thomas passage. And so what I wanted to do was like something that I'm sure you've heard before and like listeners have heard before, that like doubt is not the opposite of faith, certainty is, and then like encourage people to be a doubting Thomas. And, you know, I talked about like, again, Tillich talks about doubt constitutes faith, or doubt, it provides the very occasion for faith to arise. And so when I was reading the Thomas story, what I thought was really super interesting is like, so obviously Thomas was with Jesus the whole time, right? Then post-resurrection, Jesus appears to the disciples, except somehow Thomas wasn't there. Even though Thomas was kind of like the, you know, like, I don't know, he was like one of the top guys, like always doing stuff like, you know, Lord, where we go, these kind of things. And he wasn't there for some reason. And then there was the second time, you know, Jesus appears, Thomas is there, but he still refuses to believe even what he's seeing. And so I'm like, yep, that's understandable, because, you know, think about it metaphysically within his framework. Like, yeah, people don't raise from the dead. That's strange. And like historically, I saw Jesus get murdered. Like, we know he's dead. So instead, something existential happened. It was when Jesus invites Thomas to experience his woundings, which I'm going to say symbolically represents one of the most beautiful truths of the Christian tradition, the claim that God, in the person of Jesus, chose not to be God without us, but instead identifies with all who die cross dead, with all who suffer in the person of Jesus. And so by Jesus inviting Thomas into his wounds, he was inviting Thomas to identify with the wounds of all who die cross dead, with the suffering of everybody. And that's where faith arose for Thomas, was when he risked himself in the direction of suffering with the marginalized. It wasn't a belief thing. It wasn't about checking off right and wrong, this or that. He risked himself in a direction, I would say the direction of love, to choose to identify with the those on the margins like Jesus did. And it is there that faith blossoms for Thomas. I would say that is that is faith.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway,
I like that, because
yeah.
if you look at it like he heard about it and he didn't believe, and then he saw it and he didn't believe, but then the existentially experienced an invitation, and then he's like, well, this is something I can risk myself for.
Yeah,
that's really interesting.
There's another, you know, forgive me for stealing from him again, you know, and Tripp, if you hear this, get your head out of your ass. I'm not trying to inflate your ego. But Tripp used to do another thing that I think is a great example. When he was a UCC minister in LA, people would come to the church, and a lot of the times it would be like a spouse, and they'd bring like their atheist partner along with them. And so they're like, oh, well, let's have something fun for the atheists to do. So Tripp started doing these things called experiments in truth, where him and a group of atheists would pick a teaching from Jesus. So the one that he likes to talk about the most is the, you know, don't judge passage. And then just live into it and see what happens. And so what they did was they had a text group, and throughout the week, if I, you know, judged you, I would text into the group, forgive me, God, I judged Tom today. Please give me eyes to see Tom the way that you do, unconditionally and infinitely loved. And then people would be, sending in different people's names who they judged. And then ultimately, within a couple days, trips that had happened every time, people would start sending in their own name. Yeah, and so it'd be like, please forgive me. Today I judged Josh. God, please give me the eyes to see myself the way that you see me, infinitely and unconditionally loved. That's an existential disposition and way of engaging something that has nothing to do with truth claims or propositions. But it's an experienced truth. And like, that's something that I think a lot of conservative religion can't understand, because it's not the kind of truth of like, I don't know, this pen is black, or, I'm wearing a Penta shirt today. But it's a different kind of truth. Anyway, I think that's a helpful example.
That is helpful. Like when I do a funeral, I always talk about John O'Donohue quote about how our loved ones are not gone. They're with us in an invisible presence. And part of the healing of grief is learning how to see and sense that presence. Then I get very practical for people. And I make a little joke. I'm like, I'm a pastor, but I'm also a skeptic. So that's pretty fun. And everyone chuckles. I'm like, after my dad died, someone came up to me and told me that, my dad, your dad will visit you, and send a message somehow. Usually it's through a dragonfly. And in my brain, I was like, well, that's a bunch of bullshit. But I said, well, thank you very much. And then I had an experience that next summer I was barefoot in the sand on the Muskegon River where we go to vacation, and a dragonfly landed on my toe and stared at me like 30 minutes. It just didn't leave. And that's never happened before. And I started to cry, and I was like, crap, they were right. But I'm not supposed to believe in that stuff. That's stupid faith, supernatural stuff. And I don't believe in that. I'm very practical and here and now. So I let people know, like, I don't know how it works. I just know that it's true. Mm-hmm. That's a phrase I say. I was like, I don't really know how this works. I just know, and I've experienced that it's true. Every single time someone will come up to me afterwards and they'll be like, well, for me, it's not a dragonfly, but it's, a red bird, or, a deer, or that song comes on the radio that just out of the blue. And then all of a sudden I find myself crying in the car, and it's like, yeah, I don't know how it works. I just know that it's true. And like, that's a different way of experiencing truth. Not as a factual, like my dad inhabited a dragonfly and stared at me and he tried to say something, but I was too skeptical to get the message. Like, no, that's a stupid way to think about that. That's not a holy, sacred way to think about that. That's a naturalist, materialist way to think about that. And instead, I just acknowledge it's true. I don't know how it works, but I know that it's true. And I leave it at that. And that is a way. It's like a door that you're inviting people into the sacred without putting a sign on the outside that say only Christians can experience this. Come through, It's like you're just inviting people in their humanity to experience their grief and their loved ones somehow from beyond or something. And I just say, I don't know how it works. I just know that it's true. And so many people connect with that verbiage. And it's been a way for me to embrace something new and enchanted without going backwards into like supernatural, frames of trying to define things and slap not verbs, but nouns on things, and creedal declarations on things. And so I really connect with where you're going with those thoughts.
Yeah, so like another place my mind goes, and like I'm not making any truth claims. I'm going to throw a theory out there. Mm-hmm. We'll see what happens. That is forming in my head as you're talking. So within process thought, like one thing that'll be helpful to remember, listeners, is that process thinking is panentheistic. So it's not God exists out there and the world is here and they're separate, but rather God exists within the world and the world exists within God. So it's not pantheism. It's not that God and the world are the same. There's still a difference, but it's panentheistic, all in God. So that's something to consider. Another thing to know is that how God functions within the realm of process thought is that as God is experiencing things moment by moment, each of those moments is remembered by God, like objectively, forever. So that like becomes a part of who God is, and then is always present. And so those past things inform the next moment of becoming. So they're constantly there. It's like the past is meeting the current moment, they kiss, and then it's the next moment. And that happens constantly. And so Whitehead talked about, there's these arguments about, how we know things, epistemology. And one thing that Whitehead posits that's unique to him, or was maybe at the time, is this notion of prehension, which is he's trying to say that there is such thing as non-sensory perception, that our bodies are taking in information that we aren't cognitively aware of. It's not just like everything I'm seeing, that's what my mind's taking in, but there are other things. And so in process thought, in each moment of becoming, the past is there. So we prehend the past in each moment of our becoming, and that again informs our next step. And so in this way, everybody has what's called objective immortality. Even when we die, the Josh Patterson experience exists within the divine memory forever and continues to have causal efficacy in the world. It's still, my influence is still happening because it exists within the divine forever. And so like when we lose a loved one, and maybe we talk about dragonflies or something like that, dragonflies are prehending as well. So it could be possibly that even the dragonfly is prehending these kind of past conversations about like, oh, dad might visit me as a dragonfly, and kind of giving in to the divine lure, so to speak. It's not that God's making the dragonfly do something, but that it's actually prehending those past experiences and delivering a message. I don't think that's too ridiculous, based off the framework. I know that was a lot, so forgive me, but like,
no, it wasn't a lot.
Cool. It's beautiful.
I think you took it a couple steps further. Like, we're just so used to thinking in those nouns, like God is making the dragonfly, or my dad is making the dragonfly do the thing. Mm-hmm. It's like it has to fit inside of a framework of these nouns and these metaphysics. And like what you said, that we conflate history and metaphysic and existential into one thing. I think that's those things are starting to break apart in, I guess, the collective understanding of human experience. And like the very conservative Christians want to maintain control. And so they want to maintain the conspiracy theory that they are correct about how the world works, their metaphysic, which I didn't even know that was a metaphysic. I thought it was a theology. But,
Yeah.
So I guess let's pause there. What's the difference between a metaphysic and a theology?
Well, that's a good question. So theology would be specifically God talk. But like when you're doing metaphysics, you're kind of like, if you're a theist, you're positing like understanding of the divine and what the divine is and how it functions. So I think it's hard to maybe pull those two apart. You could have like a metaphysic that is deeply atheistic. So then you're not doing theology at that part because you're not doing like the study of God. But if you are a theist and you do believe in God, then metaphysics and theology are going to kind of overlap a lot, which is actually why. So metaphysics used to be really important in philosophy. And then people were kind of like, oh, we've had the Enlightenment and we now know that all of this is bullshit and it's just reductionistic materialism is the only answer. So we're not going to do metaphysics anymore. And so they pushed away from metaphysics and theology. They separated theology out of philosophy as well, which I think those two are deeply intertwined, interconnected. but more recently, and like even, I mean, with amongst process people or some of the leading ones who are trying to do that, we're saying like, no, like metaphysics is actually good. Like they're trying to do the re-enchantment bit. And you know, they're not embarrassed to think about, you know, the possibility of the divine. And it's not going to look like, so remember all the way back in the beginning when I was talking about radical and process thought, one thing that they share is they both reject ontotheology is the big word for it. The basically classical theism, the omni-God is another way of saying it. So that God is omnipotent, omniscient, you know, I'm going to immutable,
Present.
impassible. Omnipresence is a part of that, but like you would still hold to omnipresence in process thought. But basically, they're rejecting that idea of classical theism and agreeing with someone like Nietzsche, who's like, yeah, that God is dead. It doesn't make sense. It doesn't work with our world. And there's different ways people do the whole death of God thing. But process thought agrees with that, but they still posit the divine. And so their metaphysics is tied up in theology. Because like there are some people who argue that Whitehead's system doesn't work without God. But the reason Whitehead became a theist is because he only thought his system worked with God. And so if it's the guy's system and we want to use it, we should probably side with him if he thought that, you know, you should have God. But that can split a room of process people if they want to be atheists.
Well, I'm thinking that like theology is like vocabulary we wrap around the metaphysical experience of the world.
Yeah, that could be
Like,
good.
Because I will have, being a Christian, I will have Christian vocabulary, but I won't demand that Christian vocabulary be used to define everybody's metaphysic. I can use Christian vocabulary to describe my metaphysics in my culture. This is what makes sense, you know, here to say these things, to use the word Jesus to describe God, or it just works here. But if I were to go over to India and enter into a culture that experiences their metaphysic wrapped around Hinduism, that's going to be a very different world to try and talk into. They're going to have theology that they wrap around their metaphysic and how they understand the world. That's going to be, you know, based in their geography, their history, their culture. And like in the past, we would send missionaries over to then colonize them with the Western vocabularies of Christianity and say, reject your metaphysic, embrace our metaphysic. You know, our theology is describing it. Because we're the ones who are right, because we're the ones who have the theologies around it. We own it. We, you know, like blues and stuff. And I still feel comfortable using Christian vocabulary to describe the metaphysic, but I don't make the metaphysics subservient to the theology, if that makes sense. Like I experience the world in a certain way. If you need me to use Christian vocabulary to describe it, I can do that. If not, I can use just a human experience of the world to describe it. And that's how I can do a funeral for someone who's not spiritual, doesn't want a religious thing, and still have people come up to me afterwards and say things like, well, you said the words of God, but it was so human. And it's like, yeah, I said the same thing. I just didn't wrap the Christian vocabulary around it, but you know what I'm talking about because you're human and you experience the world this way. So I think making the metaphysics subservient to the theology is kind of the backwards way to do things that creates conspiracy thinking theologies and mindsets. And instead, we can recontextualize God and just look around and say, what kind of world do we live in? What's the best way to describe this? And possibly Christian vocabulary can help. Possibly not. Not all the time. Depends on your context.
It's like the difference, understanding the difference between love and the beloved. Like if I introduced you to Noelle, my partner, and I was like, Tom, this is Noelle. This is all the reasons that I love her, why she's great, why I'm so glad we're married, blah, 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 blah. And then if you were like, okay, great, that's wonderful. Now I'm going to marry your wife and have sex with her because that's where the love is. I was like, no, like you can see and identify that we have love, which is something that you understand from your own relationship. But you can distinguish Noel as my beloved, even though love is the thing that's the same. And so it kind of can function similarly, I think, within religious traditions, where if love is, the thing and the beloved is the tradition itself, we know how to make that distinction. And then we can come together and celebrate that, like, hey, look how great love is, and look at all these beautiful ways that it is expressed. And then not at the same time, that doesn't mean when I see things in Buddhism that I love, that I have to go now be a Buddhist or a Hindu or a Jew or any of those things. I can take those things into my understanding of love. I can respect them. I can be in relationship with them, but that doesn't mean that they have to then become my beloved, right? So I think that's a helpful kind of way of thinking about that. And especially, I mean, if process thought is true, then yeah, God is meeting each individual in a way that's best for them in each moment of their becoming. So of course that's going to look different in different context. Why wouldn't it? Yeah. So anyway,
I like the distinction between the experience of love and then my experience of love, the versus my. And in my evangelical upbringing, they would have said, well, that's postmodern relativism. That's dangerous. And it's like, but it isn't. It's my experience of the world, which is going to be different than your experience of the world because you have a different way of looking at the world, different upbringing. And if it can be so different between two people that grow up in the same town, attend the same church, it must be vastly different between two people on two sides of the earth. Even just if you want to look at the Bible, written 3,000 years ago in some instances, it's like that description of reality, we don't have to just slap on a t-shirt and start wearing it and say, well, this is what they described in the Iron Age as being true, so it must be. It's like, some of this was written Iron Age, Bronze Age, maybe Stone Age. Like, this is really like old stuff. We have to learn what it meant to them, but also we need to then build a bridge between how does that translate into a modern experience of that. I think that's the hard part of the Bible in religious faith communities, is they're reading it creedally and saying, tell me objectively what is true and historical and accurate and factual out of this book so I can agree with it and be in the right. And you're saying this is more of a wisdom tradition, and there are different ways that we can read this book and understand this book. That sounds a little bit more indigenous, actually, having wisdom and myth and metaphor and story. So what kind of role could sacred writings, I'll just leave it open, not just the Bible, but sacred writings have in like helping us craft a narrative of how the world works, even though they might be really, really old and don't necessarily translate into the modern world?
yeah, well, I think it helps provide a recognition of people's like genuine experiences of what they would describe as the divine. Or these traditions of people over thousands of years wrestling with what it means to be human and then trying to put words to it, because they have found like, oh, when you don't murder people all the time, the world tends to be a better place. So it's learned its wisdom. And so I think for me, that's how spiritual and holy text function, is kind of, I don't know, finger pointing at the moon kind of thing. Yeah, and like not, I think we probably have talked about that before the last time I came on, especially if we were talking about Merton and stuff, but yeah, like not mistaking a holy text, the map for like the treasure itself, but it's rather a way of getting there, or not mistaking our, a finger pointing at the moon for the moon itself. I think holy text focus like that. What's his name? Pete Holmes has a line that I love when he talks about like religious beliefs and like holy text and all, where he says like always true, sometimes real. I like that a lot. But again, the truthiness of it comes from experiential reality. It comes from existentially risking oneself in the direction of it and then participating and seeing if it's true or not. But that's different than propositional truth claims, which is where I think people, constantly get hung up. So it is a way of shifting and changing your perspective. But even too, I mean, just to comment a little bit on like the religious pluralism thing and not being like, reductionistic, postmodernism or whatever. The kind of like religious pluralism that I would want to posit or put forth, again, heavily influenced by a lot of process theologians, is what's called deep religious pluralism. And so it doesn't try to conflate all religions and say that they're like doing the same thing or, secretly all worshiping the same God or something like that. But instead, it seeks out like the truthiness in all the different spaces while also celebrating the diversity and recognizing that the diversity is what helps lead us into deeper truth. And so there's an inherent posture of mutual hospitality and mutual humility between traditions that also is trying to cultivate mutual transformation. So without the difference, there would be none of that. So the difference is actually really important, and we should celebrate those things and look at them as a way to learn and to grow. And so like, for me, engaging other religious texts outside of the Christian tradition, which is the one I'm most familiar with and most comfortable with, has just helped, I don't know, take the wisdom from those and see if it works. And if it does, then great. Like, it's a truthy thing. So I don't know if
have
that's a
you
good answer
encountered
if you're asking, but
well, have you encountered Ken Wilber?
yes, Ken Wilber does like the perennial philosophy.
Yeah, he has the grow up, wake up, show up, clean up. Like a religion that helps you do those four things is pretty good. If it helps you grow up, like psychological, mental maturity, clean up, like deal with your shadow, deal with your sin, deal with whatever vocabulary, and then wake up is kind of expand your consciousness and empathy and awareness, and then show up is actually bring something good to the world and cause positive change. And so he says any of he uses an instance of, some of the most mystical Eastern religions have an emphasis on waking up, expanding consciousness, meditation, but they still adhere to like a very heavy caste system and slavery. And, they don't have an understanding of like getting out of that mindset. Whereas some of the Western religions, like, well, we've kind of have been targeting slavery and saying this is bad. We're trying to abolish it. But we didn't focus in on like consciousness expansion and all that. So there's all these different categories. Ken Wilber is really good at that, thinking through things just on multiple different, I guess, wavelengths. But it kind of made me think of that because we did a question series at my church where I just had people ask me questions, and then one of the questions was, which religion is right? And I was like, well, let's use this as a chance to dive into, I guess, the big six religions of the world, Buddhism, Hinduism, and Judaism, Christianity, Islam, and atheism. Is a very fast-growing spiritual system, religious system that rejects it, but it's there. And at the end, I was like, we can't really know who's like right if we're thinking in the categories that we're thinking in. What we have to, and then I introduced those four concepts and say, if like, I don't understand how Hinduism works. Like I'm so different from what I understand. It's not something I can wrap my mind around and then make a judgment call over it. But it's really old. It's shaped a culture. It's over there. So instead of me going over there and trying to convert a bunch of people, I can use these four categories to look at it and say, is it doing this and this and this and this? Showing up, waking up, cleaning up, growing up. where is the strength points of this religious context for these people in these areas, and then make a judgment call on, is it good for them or not? If it keeps making slavery happen, if you have religion that keeps making slavery happen, it's like, well, that's an area you got to work on because that sucks. But I can also use it for my own religion and say, well, if we keep not expanding our consciousness and including empathy and awareness for people who are not like us, and we just keep, getting the world smaller and smaller, and you have to look like me, think like me, behave like me, pray like me in order to be included, that sucks. It's like, we got to work on that. So I think that's a framework with which to find value in other religions or to critique them, including our own.
Yeah. Which I love that, because I think too, it makes it, you made it, I think, an important point. Like, we have all these freaking books out there that are like, I studied every religion and it obviously is Christianity is the right one. Like, because of how I think and understand about religious traditions, I don't feel qualified to make a judgment call like that. Like, odds are, if I was born in the Middle East, I'd be a Muslim right now. And like, I would think, of course, mine is the most true. And I can't reject Islam outright because I've never grown up as a Muslim experiencing the truthiness of what it means to be a Muslim. Like, I haven't done it. So how can I reject that outright? I think it's too, there's too much hubris in it. It's too arrogant.
Yes.
The world's just is messier than that.
Yeah.
And I think one more thing too, I want to mention just about story, when you're talking about like, the roles that, text and all this kind of stuff play, is I think we need story in society. Like, even if, Paul Tillich talks a lot about symbols and recognizing the importance of symbols. And, he would ground his symbols in I should say this differently, but because I was going to say he would ground his symbols in the ground of being, which is his understanding of God, which I think you know what I mean. That's where they exist. But like, symbols are these organic things that grow, and symbols participate in the reality that they're pointing to. So to call something just a symbol means you don't understand what a symbol is. And so we have these different symbols that have shifted and grown throughout the world, throughout people's history, throughout these different religious traditions that have worked over time. And then, as symbols begin to fail, new symbols start to emerge, which is why I think people love, like Marvel movies so much, or Spider-Man or whatever. There are these new cultural symbols that arise and give voice to the story of what it means to be human. And we need those things. And so I think like people just in general need to continue to have story. And like, some stories are better than others, right? To be blunt, like, one of the reasons that I talk about, like, why I still pick the Christian story, is one, because of the love thing, right? Faith is risk in a direction. And for me, that's risk myself in the direction of love. When I learn about the person of Jesus, sounds a lot like love to me. So I'm here for it. But also, that's a better story. Like, the idea that the truest thing about me is that I'm known, seen, and loved by the God, and that God chose not to be God without me, hence Jesus, is a good story. That's worth risking myself in the direction of. What's maybe a different story I could look at? What's the story of like capitalism? Or like, what's the story that TikTok tells you when you open up your phone and start scrolling through it? That your inherent worth is tied to how many bricks you can build for empire? That you're not smart enough, you're not beautiful enough, you're too fat, you're ugly, like whatever. Those are shit stories. So like, we need better stories to risk ourselves in the direction of. And I don't know. I think that's another thing. Like, story just seems to be a part of how we engage with the transcendent, or with awe and wonder. And some stories are better than others. And so I like the ones about love.
Yeah, me too. And we're needing those stories really, really much. So last question.
Okay.
If someone listening to this is kind of stuck in that, maybe that old medieval framework, or I've deconstructed, rejected it, but now I find myself in this suspicious of every experience of sacred, and they're kind of stuck in like a flat materialist understanding, what steps might help them move towards a more enchanted version of life or vision of life?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's going to depend on the person. Like, if you are a nerd like me and live in your head, like, I could point people in the direction of some helpful process thinkers. A really helpful tool that is out, well, I think we mentioned it earlier, is, I don't know if it's been published yet as a book, but I know it's coming out as a book. But Chad Ball's dissertation that will also be a book, called The Death of Supernaturalism and the Case for Process Naturalism, is like one of the most accessible presentations of process thought that gets at this very question that I have encountered. It's very good. If listeners want a challenge and they feel like trying to read David Ray Griffin, check out the Supernaturalism without, or Re-Enchantment without Supernaturalism. It's a really great text. But also just like go try the experiments in truth thing. Like pick a truth claim from Jesus, or if you want to do it different, from Buddha, or, wherever, and live into it. Try it out. See what happens. And I think, also give yourself permission to trust your experience. And, when you feel moments of awe or wonder or transcendence, don't write that off as like just, it's just chemicals in my brain. Like, yeah, that's a part of it. But like, my friend Sarah Lane Ritchie, who does a lot of work on like, with like the cognitive neuroscience and spiritual experience and spiritual technologies and all this kind of stuff, she would say, like, if you think it's, it's never just anything. So it's not just your, chemical processes. There's something more going on there. And just give yourself permission to be open to that. You don't have to be dogmatic about anything. You can still be humble, but explore, experiment on shit. See what works. Get connected with people who are like-minded and are cool and see what happens. Yeah. Anyway.
I like it. That's great. I like just take the word just out of your vocabulary.
Yeah, remove it. It's not a helpful word. Like, life is not black and white. Nothing is. Which I know I just made a logical contradiction because I'm telling you nothing is black and white, which is a black and white statement.
That is a black and white statement in itself. But
yeah, the certainty of uncertainty. Another way of.
Yeah. Well, Josh, thanks for coming on, exploring this topic. I'm really curious about it. You gave me some new thoughts to think about. I learned some stuff, and I always like the things that just kind of arise in conversation that you can't plan for. Mm-hmm. The things said and talked about, and there was plenty here. So I'll be listening to this one probably a couple times when it comes out.
Sweet.
I listen to my own podcast because it's for me. I do it for me, and everyone else gets to listen in on it.
I do the same thing.
I learn from it. It's like, oh yeah, that was a good one. That was a good conversation. Not because I was amazing or anything, but like the thoughts that came out. I'm like, I want to hear that again. So,
yeah. Or as Rob Bell says, joy has no shame in repeating itself. So if something brings you joy, enjoy it.
Enjoy the joy. I like it. Well, we're gonna have to definitely have you back on when that work you're putting together comes out, and we can talk
early
about
next
that,
year. The target.
All right. Well, that gives me some space to think about. Yeah, I like that. We're gonna do that. Let's do that.
Sounds like a plan to me.
All right. Well, thanks for coming on the show. Do you want to send anyone any directions for? You got a podcast and anything else you want to point them? YouTube page or anything like that?
So I'm not cool enough, or basically I've been too lazy to set up a YouTube channel, but the podcast is found wherever podcasts are streamed audibly. So you can do that. I'm on Instagram at Rethinking Faith. My personal Instagram is on there as well, jpatty94. Get it, Josh Patterson, jpatty.
Jpatty.
That's a nickname from like middle school. But and then also I have a website now, joshuagpatterson.com, where different like writing things that I do are on there. My podcast is on there, my Patreon's on there, a contact form, all that kind of stuff. Yeah. And then also I've been doing Substack. I haven't posted on it recently, But there's I think I have 9 or 10 things up on there that are fun if people want to explore that. So you can find that as well.
All right. Well, I will put some links in the notes so people can just click on them.
Sweet. Sounds like a plan.
Well, thanks for coming on the show, Josh.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. Have a good one.